True. Understood.
Next thing is, so UFC 264 being headlined by none other than Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier. That's going to be the trilogy fight. So if we go back down memory lane, probably about 7 years ago, Conor McGregor fought Dustin Poirier. Now, they were both very, very different fighters back then in the featherweight division. Conor McGregor knocked him out within, I think, about 90 seconds in the first round. And there was no indication that that Poirier was on the same level as Conor. Fast forward to early this year, we had the fight back in March. Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 2 that was happening in Abu Dhabi, and it had a different kind of energy around it. You couldn't sense there wasn't the same tension as like the first fight. The second fight, they were a lot more easygoing. They had a little bit of comments towards each other. Conor McGregor saying that he would knock him out within 60 seconds of the first round, kind of adding to his own motivation to beat his own goals, since he knocked him out quite early in the first round. And then to most people's surprise, that Dustin Poirier, since being extremely active compared to the very inactive Conor McGregor, switching in between sports and making a lot of money, which could have affected his intrinsic motivation to actually, continue to compete at the elite level like everyone else who was continuing to be active in the sport. And we saw Dustin Poirier knock out Conor McGregor in combination with some beautiful calf kicks that really wobbled Conor, and just planted some, excellent strikes. There was moments in the fight that Conor did very, very well against Dustin Poirier, and there were some shots that just missed and probably would have cleaned anyone's clock in the lightweight division. But now we're seeing the third fight, the trilogy. It's a very quick turnaround. It's about, just over 3 months. It's whether or not... it would be longer than that. It would be about 6 months, sorry.
Yeah.
So the original fight must have been that original fight was in January, was it not?
Yeah.
January. Yeah, well, sorry, that was in January.
Yeah.
It was in January, and 6 months later, we're going to see them fight in July, the start of July. It's July 11th? July 11th for us, but July 10th for everyone else in America, yeah. But what's your thoughts on this? They're now 1-1. It's very different. Do you think Conor McGregor can actually do you think he can make the changes that, that are required to beat this evolved Dustin Poirier?
Well, one thing I know for a fact is that Conor's very, very good when it comes to rematches. If you look at when he fought Nate Diaz the second time, he was so much better. He understood his holes in his game. He's very good at taking things and improving on them. He's very so I do believe there's a potential shot, but you got to understand, Dustin Poirier was never a pushover. It was never a joke. Ever since he's lost to Michael Johnson, he's just been on like absolute smash and drew. And we keep forgetting, he did something that, he almost achieved the idea which Conor never could have, and that was he nearly beat Khabib at one point when he had him in a tight guillotine, and it still bothers him a lot to this day. And there were still some moments in that fight where he was starting to wobble Khabib. Like, he was the closest thing they ever had to beating him. Now, when we saw that last fight, he obviously exposed the holes in Conor's game. Now, another thing was that we had the idea that Conor was training for boxing. He wasn't training properly for MMA fight, which didn't really make sense to me, considering Dustin Poirier is one of the best boxers in the lightweight division, for sure, in terms of... because he went up, if you need any further, he beat Max Holloway, who is considered one of the highest out strikers in the UFC. I feel like it needs to be more than just checking leg kicks. I think it needs to be something that we haven't really seen before. I feel like it needs to be a little bit better, his distance control. Because with the idea that when we had the last fight is when it came to, it was Southpaw versus Southpaw at one point, where the leg is literally just right there. So it was so easy for him to kick. So he needs to be able to adapt to the style that, is Dustin Poirier. Most importantly, I keep saying this a lot, but I really want to see what's going to happen if they take it to the ground. I really do. I feel like if Conor wants to shock the world, he would go for a submission, because I can't remember the last time he even won by submission.
It was back in Cage Warriors.
There you go.
It was back in Cage Warriors. I think who was it against? Was it Dave Hill? Can't remember. But it was back in Cage Warriors. It was quite a long time ago, to be honest, winning by rear naked choke. And he's very good on the ground. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt under Coach Kavanagh. Coach Kavanagh being the very first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt in all of Ireland. Yes, a small island. However, in a sport that's been growing phenomenally, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's no joke. To be a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt under Coach Kavanagh, that's incredible. Now, I think you make a really good point. Like 2 points actually to be correct. It's Conor needs to go back to using more fluid, dynamic movement. Now, he doesn't have to be doing touch button the part with Ido Portal, but he should be moving in and out of range. I think in that fight with Dustin, he was so concerned with just knocking him out early that he was willing to be so close in range that Poirier could counter him. Whereas Conor's not like that. He's fluid. He's in and out of movement using a combination of different than your capoeira, taekwondo, and karate stances. He moves and transitions back and forth. He doesn't have a really heavy, stuck in the mud, boxing stance that he did have in that last fight. And I think the second thing that you brought up was really good, was the utilizing the takedown and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. I think a lot of people sleep on his not just his takedown defense, but also his offense. You got to see in the Diego Brandao fight and the Max Holloway fight that he's got good wrestling. He's able to reverse you. He's able to, even with the Chad Mendes one, when Chad Mendes went for the guillotine and he was able to get out very quickly. Conor often uses postural control up against the cage or on the ground, because it almost looks like he's not trying or anything to get up, but he's using postural control in order to not expend a lot of energy and preserve his gas tank on the floor and be efficient. But I think he needs to do what other MMA fighters do, which is make it easier to connect with shots by threatening with the takedown. He needs to threaten with the takedown. He needs to catch Poirier off guard and almost try and take him down or go for a submission attempt, right? And then continue striking. And that way Poirier is going to be a little bit rattled, just a tiny bit, a little bit confused, because Poirier hasn't really seen that side of McGregor. Not many people have. And I think McGregor needs to threaten with the takedown, or he needs to threaten with some form of ground game, so that when he's moving in and out, it's confusing and the biting on certain feints, and he's able to connect with shots that might have been a little bit more predictable and telegraphed if Poirier was just solely concentrating and knowing that he's just going to trade with me. He's just going to strike. I think Conor needs to be a mixed martial artist, not a boxer. I think he needs to go back to that fluid kickboxing stance that he was using, in and out of range, being light on his feet. And if he gets taken down, he gets taken down. He does what he usually does, scoots back to the cage, rides up on the back, sits his hips out in and gets back up. I think he needs to be a kickboxer, and then transition more into being a mixed martial artist, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I did want to bring up something else just before we move on, is that with Conor and Poirier, Conor and Dustin have both had not very close matches with Khabib Nurmagomedov, largely being, he's been the greatest lightweight champion that we've ever seen. And Khabib put out a statement. So he thinks that in order to win the trilogy, Conor has to knock Dustin out in the first round. And he says, I think I pick Conor if it goes to the first round, but I think if it goes second round onwards, I give the win to Dustin. What do you think about that?
Well, that's a little bit of a hard one to put my finger on, because I definitely do agree with parts of it. I do agree with the fact that, first round was always Conor's thing. First round's he's always done really well in the first round, but because he has such a high output, he's always looking to put the fight away quickly. Second round, yes, we always talk about now the second round is deadly, as shown in 2021. And, that also gives Dustin a little bit of time to take in his flaws, adjust, and go back. However, onwards, I'm not entirely sure because if you think about it, there was later rounds that they argue that within the Khabib fight, people argue that Conor won the third round or not, or so.
I would argue he did in the third round.
Yeah, yeah, and also he does have a little. He did utilize his gas tank against Nate Diaz, who has one of the best gas tanks in the whole UFC, and he managed to come back in those last couple of rounds and finish the fight. So I do agree with that. However, I do agree with the round one part. I do agree with the round two for Dustin, but onwards, it's anybody's guess, really.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's anyone's guess at that point. I do want your pick though. So we've already talked about like the route to the path to victory. Who do you think wins this fight come July 11th?
It's such a hard decision for me, man, because I'm done. I actually don't have one.
You gotta have one.
This is one of those very, very few fights where I just don't have an answer because one, they both won. I'm a big fan of them both. My mistake I made with the last fight was I slept a little bit on Dustin, really, but after Conor coming back. And now Dustin's got even more to work on. He's riding a high, and I know for a fact that he's one of the biggest workhorses ever because I'm always watching his training videos. Conor McGregor, when he was always considered one of the best strikers that we had in lightweight division. He was always one of the goalpost. He was one of the poster boys for the UFC. It's just and everyone, and he's the money fighter. So it's too hard for me to answer. I don't have an answer. That's all I can say really for the time being.
I'll answer for you then. Conor McGregor, third round KO.
You're going to say Conor McGregor third?
I'm going to say third round KO as well. I think that a lot of people slept on the point that Conor looks very, very... He looked very, very different in that last fight for a lot of reasons. I think his gas tank was, and like his aerobic capacity there was a big change. I felt like his output was still pretty high, but his ass never touched the stool, right? And I think Conor may actually play a little bit safer in this third fight. I think he'll still have high output, but he'll be a little bit safer because there's a lot riding on this fight, Even with the amount of money he has, like his image as one of the best fighters to grace the octagon, he needs to keep that. And I think that's all the motivation he needs if he wants to continue to build his legacy. So I think third round KO. I think Poirier, he has evolved, but if you look back on his fights, even in the featherweight and the start of the lightweight division, he hasn't changed that much. Like the way he fights hasn't changed that much. His check hook has not really changed. He's just became a little bit smarter, and he's added a few little bits and pieces like the calf kick and things like that through his coach. But I think that it's going to be a close matchup in those first and second rounds. And I think perhaps Conor McGregor could finish it in that third round. It would be interesting to see a decision through Conor McGregor. It's not like it's not possible, but I think with McGregor, I think a third round KO is quite likely in this fight. I think there was a few punches in that second fight that if they just made their mark, Poirier would have been out. But
there was definitely,
yeah, the calf kicks definitely played a big factor in terms of timing and things like that, and control. But I would like to see who comes more prepared this time. Yeah.